Hello there. Well, you are watching the press preview, a first look at what's on the front pages as they arrive. In the next half hour, we'll see what's making the headlines with journalist and author Rachel Shabi and political correspondent at the Press Association, Geri Scott. They will be with us from now until just before midnight. Well, let's start by having a look at what's on some of those front pages. We begin with The Observer, which leads with criticism of the Prime Minister after he compared Ukraine's resistance to Russia with Brexit, telling the Tory party's spring conference that Ukrainians want to be free to do things differently. The Sunday Times has the same story. It adds that in an interview, Boris Johnson reveals he told China that backing Russia is like picking the wrong side in the Second World War. The Express, meanwhile, has the Russian military's announcement that it has used a new hypersonic missile for the first time in combat. The Sunday Telegraph reports Boris Johnson is privately frustrated with the Chancellor's apparent resistance to his plans to increase the number of nuclear power plants in Britain. And The Star has a story about what they claim is a haunted hotel in Britain. And a reminder that by scanning the QR code that you'll see on screen during the programme, you can check out the front pages of tomorrow's papers while you watch us. Well, as we said, we're joined tonight by Rachel Shabi and Geri Scott. So let's get straight into those papers. And let's begin with this story that's on the front of the Express. Now Putin unleashes invisible missile. This is the hypersonic missile capable of carrying nuclear weapons that was fired. It's the Kinzhal missile that has been fired for the first time. It is a worrying new development in this war. Does it mark, do you think, Geri Scott, a new stage?
Well, I think it does, but I don't think anyone's really surprised. I mean, it's terrifying. This missile can travel 5 times the speed of sound. No kind of modern, anti-missile technology that we have seems to be able to stop it. But defence officials, Western officials have been saying that really we are expecting Putin to escalate his methods because this invasion has not gone to plan for him. He was expecting a very swift takeover of Kyiv, that President Zelensky would arguably be out of the way by now. So he's getting more and more desperate and using even more indiscriminate methods in this conflict. And we've seen that in the various bombings of civilian buildings, of the theatre, and it just seems like it's going to get more and more bloody, and it's an awful situation.
Rachel Shabi, do you agree with that? Do you think this is a sort of continuation of what we've seen, this slow escalation, or is this... because given the fact that the West can't stop these weapons, does that show that actually, if and when Putin decides he wants to take the upper hand, perhaps he still has it?
Yeah, I think I agree with Geri in the sense that it is moving into this phase of a war of attrition, essentially. So we can see Russian forces now are doing very similar to what they did in Syria, actually, which is to just surround cities and besiege civilian populations, just bombard them from the air. Absolutely grotesque way to carry out a war and, besieging civilians in that way. But that is what Putin seems to be doing, not least because I think it's right to say that this hasn't gone according to plan for Putin, or certainly not according to plan A. The Russian army seems to be really underprepared. The strategy doesn't seem to have been that great. And meanwhile, I think the Ukrainians have surprised not just Putin, but, more widely with the opposition that they've been able to put up, not least because there's been such a civilian effort to resist that appalling Russian invasion, but also because the Ukrainian army actually seems pretty well equipped, even before Western nations started to channel ever more sophisticated weaponry to Ukraine to resist that invasion. It already seemed to be able to resist Russian advances. And so we are now in this period of attrition where, it's very hard to see how this doesn't lead to more and more brutal deaths. And the Russians are taking a heavy hit as well, although, we're looking at civilian population being attacked by Russia in Ukraine. But, obviously the only way out of this is a negotiation, and it's just a case of how fast that can come to pass.
The Telegraph certainly saying, in terms of what you're talking there about the Russians taking a hit as well, the Telegraph talking about 2,500 bodies, Russian bodies taken to Belarus under the cover of darkness, which is quite a depressing image, that these soldiers will essentially be hidden from their families until I don't know when. Let's move on, because we've got lots to get through. The Observer and the front page there: fury greets Prime Minister's claim that Ukraine fight is like Brexit. This about Boris Johnson's comments yesterday that the struggle for freedom that is currently going on in Ukraine is similar to the struggle for freedom that happened during the Brexit vote. What do you make of that, Geri Scott?
Well, it's not gone down well, that's for sure, whether you look at that internationally or at home. You've had Gavin Barwell, Lord Barwell, who, of course, worked for Theresa May, saying that it's a ridiculous comparison, not least because Ukraine applied to join the EU. You've had Donald Tusk saying that it's nonsense as well. I actually think this is quite a rare misstep from Johnson in this conflict, because in Ukraine, certainly, it sounds like he is very well thought of. I interviewed a previous Ukrainian Prime Minister just the other day who said that Boris Johnson is the country's #1 ally, and Sajid Javid at the Tory Spring Conference yesterday was saying that he's been told that Boris Johnson's being called a hero in Ukraine. So it is a misstep. It doesn't seem to have gone down well, and it would be a real shame, I think, for the leadership that the UK has shown in this to be ruined by the Prime Minister trying to play to the home.
Jerry, I'm going to interrupt you because I want to just bring Rachel in quickly on this before we have to go to our break. Rachel, do you agree there with Jerry?
I do. I mean, to me, this reminds me a little bit. I'm not saying that Boris Johnson is Trump, but this seems quite a Trumpian move in the sense that it's just a stupendously ridiculous thing to say. And it immediately provokes a reaction. Everybody is triggered by it, as Jerry says, both domestically and internationally. And then that's what we're talking about instead of, other more worthy subjects. As Jerry said, it has been roundly condemned, not least, by EU leaders. And it's, worth pointing out that actually Ukraine applied to join the EU the minute that Russia invaded Ukraine.
Yeah, absolutely. And there is a sense, certainly from Donald Tusk, the former president of the European Council, saying, I still remember the enthusiasm of Putin and Trump after the referendum. Boris, your words offend Ukrainians, the British and common sense. Right, well, let's leave that for now. We will be back after the break. Coming up, we'll be taking a look at the front page of the Sunday Telegraph. Its headline: Johnson frustrated with Sunak over nuclear. Find out more about that after the break. Welcome back. You're watching the Press Preview. With me now are the journalist and author Rachel Shabi and political correspondent at the Press Association, Geri Scott. We are going to go straight into our papers. I know we're short on time in this part, so let's go straight to the front of the Telegraph. Johnson frustrated with Sunak over nuclear. Geri, this seems to show again, and we've had rumour of this before, some sort of rift between the Treasury and Number 10.
Yeah, it's fascinating, this kind of latest skirmish in the battle between the two. And yeah, this is really all part of, all manner of challenges for Number 10, whether that's kind of getting away from the kind of reliance we've had on Russian energy and the whole West needing to do that, but also to tackle this cost of living crisis, which we know is coming down the road with national insurance contributions going up and energy bills rising. Boris Johnson seems to want to have a real push on nuclear, but the Chancellor, Rishi Sunak, and his officials saying, actually, these plans aren't fully formed yet. So how can we cost them and back them? And there's a really interesting detail in this report, actually, which seems to suggest that Rishi Sunak hasn't shared his spring statement and what might be in that with Number 10, which is a very Blair and Brown, if you ask me. But it does point to some rifts between the two neighbours and not a happy family at the moment.
Yeah, certainly that was fascinating, that refusal to share those notes. Let's head straight over to the Express and this headline, Axe threat to P&O over mass sacking. The government last night reviewing its contracts with P&O after 800 ferry workers were sacked without notice. Rachel, I mean, the government, we know, has contracts with the ferry operator to transport goods. What are the chances they're actually going to do anything about those?
I think that's a really interesting question. As you say, the government uses P&O. It has just under £11 million worth of contracts to ship goods. The Labour Party has estimated that 38.3 million in government funding has gone to P&O since 2018. And maritime units have suggested that the government goes even further and just revokes P&O's licence to operate. So there's a lot of pressure on the government following this absolutely appalling, roundly condemned sacking. But it's worth pointing out, you know, whether the government is actually capable of doing this. Let's not forget that just last year, the government roundly opposed a proposal to prevent companies from fire and rehire policies, which is the sort of thing that P&O has been pursuing. 1 in 10 employees have experienced fire and rehire since 2020, or the effects of it. And so you have to wonder how much the government is willing, a government that has, you know, really bashed sort of employment rights that would allow employees to stand up to this sort of behaviour. You have to wonder how likely they are to do it. But it's also worth saying that this precedent set by P&O there needs to be some pushback. Otherwise, what's to stop other companies going ahead and doing the same thing?